After finishing school, I volunteered for the Wehrmacht because I wanted to fight for my homeland in the Great War. I decided to become a tanker and was enrolled in the tank school in Bamberg. My military training there lasted almost 6 months, from April to October 1942. The training was divided into 2 separate semesters, each lasting about 3 months. The first semester could be considered a variation of the American boot camp or basic training for soldiers, mostly infantrymen. The second semester was dedicated to specialized tank training. Training in the Wehrmacht was very difficult, rigidly organized and subject to discipline. It lasted long hours and rest time was very short, if any at all. We were not given leave for the first 6 months, and then leave was given only if we successfully passed our first honor test. Naturally, they didn't want us to go into town and represent the army if we couldn't properly salute our seniors. Another reason, and perhaps the main reason, was to limit the number of people going into town. I really wanted to go on leave, but when it was my turn to salute, the angle of my outstretched arm in relation to the top of my head was a few degrees less than required. So I spent the weekend not far from the barracks. In December 1942, a certain major from the elite SS division, Greater Germany, came to Bamberg. We were not told what his mission was, but all our companies, one by one, had to stand before him on the dressing ground. The major was accompanied by our company commanders, and then our field officers told some of us that we were to report to a certain room that very evening. When we appeared, we were told to go in one by one. When I entered, I saw a major sitting at a table. He asked me what my name was, what part of Germany I was from, how long I had served, and what I thought of the war and Hitler. My answers obviously won his approval, because the next day I was informed that I was one of the lucky ones to be accepted into Gross Deutschland. I was appointed leader of a group of 6 men who had been selected from the Bamberg regiment. We were ordered to report first to Berlin and then to Cottbus, where the main part of the division was stationed, and then to Königsberg in East Prussia. Soon we were told that we now belonged to the Fuhrer's escort battalion, guarding Hitler himself and his headquarters. Instead of feeling excited and honored, I thought I was here, still in Germany, and instead of fighting at the front I would only be a guard. It was a mixed feeling. I knew it was an honor to be chosen for such an assignment, but I was disappointed at the same time. However, we were assured that we would serve at the front as well, then we would be transferred to the battle zone. As it turned out, we actually had 2 battalions, one serving at the front, usually the Eastern Front, and the other guarding Hitler and his headquarters. That battalion, which was in combat, reported directly to Hitler. He determined where to send that battalion, and if there was a critical situation, he would send us there to resolve it, because he knew that wherever we were sent, we succeeded. It didn't seem to matter what place on the Eastern Front we were assigned to, but we always faced the elite Soviet Red Guard, not any other Russian units. Where Hitler would send his battalion, Stalin would send his. It was as if the 2 leaders were playing at soldiering. My military specialty was tank gun maintenance. Again, during training we were taught to be more than just gunners, loaders, drivers, radio operators or tank commanders. Everyone was trained in one and, to a lesser extent, for other specialties. Naturally, a recruit could not hope to become a tank commander right away, but he was trained in command duties so that he could handle them if necessary. If a soldier demonstrated certain abilities, such as marksmanship, a good grasp of Morse code, a special aptitude for driving, or an aptitude for mechanics, he was given that specialty. I demonstrated a special aptitude for artillery, but not just for aiming and firing. We had to determine the type of projectile, in order to hit the target, estimate the distance to the target, get ahead of the target to get a match in velocity and direction, and all of this required a kind of analytical mind. Most artillerymen were selected for their potential to be commanders. I'm not bragging, but I was good enough to be selected for tank commanders who had the right to select a gunner. Of course, if you were already assigned to a commander and his tank, you usually stayed with him unless he or you were wounded or killed. We never considered our service just another job. It was our duty and honor to be a soldier. We felt we had no other choice. After all, there was a war going on. I was just of draft age, and I felt the way most other young men felt. The only way to live was to fight for the homeland, win the war, and then return in peace and rebuild my country. In the sense that we were educated and well trained, we were professionals. Our capabilities far exceeded those of the Russians. Our battle group itself was capable of destroying 5 Russian tanks for every one we lost, and I believe that ratio was such throughout the Russian campaign. Quickness of targeting and retaliation, as well as accuracy of fire, was the basis of our superiority. We were no doubt better trained, and our optics were better. But our tanks were inferior, as well as the thickness of the protective armor. The engines were too small for the weight of the tank, and the narrow tracks, which could not move on mud or swamp, should also be taken into account. On the other hand, due to our speed, good training, and our mentality, we were always above the enemy we faced. When I say we, I mean members of an elite division. This did not necessarily prove to be true for all other units fighting on the Eastern Front or other Wehrmacht units in general. When I fought on the Eastern Front, I was wounded 4 times. My first 2 wounds were in the winter of 1943, near Narva, on the Russian-Estonian border. Our tank was to guard a certain area along the edge of the forest. We were patrolling this sector at the moment when Russian 152mm artillery started firing at us. We had to move our tank after every second or third Russian salvo. I was doing observer duties, standing out of the gun turret hatch, when one of the shells hit right in front of our tank. The explosion tore out the roller and immobilized the tank. A few hours later we were dragged to the battalion repair station. After we got out of the tank and into the bunker, I decided to get out and get my writing utensils from the tank. As I was about to get off the tank for the second time, a Russian shell hit right into our tank. The shrapnel hit me in the right side of my face, although not too hard. The medic in the bunker just pulled the shrapnel out and bandaged it up. Some of the shrapnel, and I still carry it under my skin. The second time I was wounded was only a few days later. We participated in maneuvers along the Narva front before we entered the planned offensive south of Leningrad. During these maneuvers I was the gunner of an assault SU. It was getting hot in the combat compartment of the self-propelled vehicle, so I opened the small steel flap covering the opening through which the gun optics are aimed. Suddenly I heard machine gun fire and felt a warm numbness in my head. The commander ordered the driver to immediately turn around and drive back. At first we thought it was a sniper shell that ricocheted off inside the self-propelled vehicle, but later I learned that one of our infantrymen who were riding our SAU started firing at the Russians with his MG-34. But slipped off the armor and fired several bullets that hit our optics and our fighting compartment. My third wound was received during my second frontline tour of duty, shortly before the attempt on Hitler's life on July 20, 1944. We were in a battle somewhere in Lithuania when one of our shells got stuck in the barrel. It was defective. When a shell gets stuck in the barrel, the instructions are to wait at least 7 seconds, remove the defective shell and continue firing. After we had waited enough time, the commander of our self-propelled vehicle ordered us to remove the shell from the breech. This the loader did by hand. All I remember of what followed is that I saw a bright flame. I didn't hear anything, didn't feel the explosion, and honestly didn't realize what had happened. I looked back at the commander and saw that he had dropped dead. The driver was climbing out of his compartment, which was below mine, telling me, "Get out, we've been hit." I got off my armor as fast as I could and hid under the self-propelled vehicle, followed by the loader and the driver. The loader's arm was blown off. I was luckier. Although I was sent to a field hospital for a few days, my wounds consisted only of a few shrapnel hits to my face and burns on my right arm. Our commander was killed in the explosion. The investigation later determined that it was our defective shell. Apparently, when the loader opened the chamber to retrieve it, the slowly running fuse ignited the shell and it exploded inside the self-propelled vehicle. My fourth and final wounding occurred on August 8, 1944, about 2 miles from Razian, Lithuania. Our assault gun, as the company's lead SAU had been sent on an outfit to investigate Russian activity in the vicinity of Razian. As we hid behind some bushes on a hill, I saw a Russian T-34 tank diagonally crossing the valley directly in front of us. I fired my first shot at the Russian tank, and at that moment I saw a shiny object approaching us at tremendous speed. When you describe what happened in battle, it takes a long time, but in reality it was almost instantaneous. All I knew was that danger was approaching, and earlier than I might yell, "Attention!" there was a bright flash and then nothing, no sound, no explosion. On full autopilot I crawled out of the SU. I came to my senses, kneeling behind the self-propelled vehicle. I saw the driver also on his knees in front of me. "What happened?" I asked him. "We were hit by a shell." When I asked him where everyone else was, he replied, "They're all dead." As soon as the engine of the SU hissed and went silent, I heard a groan and said to the driver, "I think one of them is alive, let's help him." When we both jumped into the stern of the self-propelled vehicle, we found that the loader was alive, but he had a pistol in his hand and was about to shoot himself. This often happened to tankers who, seeing that the tank was hit and they were unable to leave it, preferred to commit suicide in lieu of a slow death in flames. I quickly knocked the weapon out of his hands and said to the driver, "Help me get him out." We tried to do so, but found that we could not move him because everything inside the SAU was mangled and his legs were trapped. At this point we heard our commander moaning. We moved to the left side of the self-propelled vehicle and saw that he was also firmly wedged in the wreckage, as was the loader. At that moment a Russian machine gun began firing at our stationary vehicle and, as we had been taught, we jumped off the self-propelled vehicle and hid behind it. After that I began to see much worse. It was only at this point that I realized I was wounded. Both hands were burned, the right one so badly that the skin was curling. My shirt was completely burned on the side of my right arm, and when I touched my face and head, all I felt was a sticky mass. Moreover, my hair was completely burned off and blood was running down my face. With realization came pain, and I found that the only way to alleviate the agony of my hands was to keep them up. So I made my way down the hill, barely able to see the track marks our assault gun had left in the grass, to the gravel pit where safety and help awaited me. By this time all I could see were milky spots in front of my eyes. I lost consciousness, and all I remember is someone talking to me and me lying on a camp bed. I didn't understand what he was telling me. According to my plaque with the medical and other information that accompanies a wounded soldier, the chaplain performed the last rites on me. My condition and that of the chargeman were so serious that they decided there was no more help for us, and expecting us to die soon, they left us in the field hospital rather than send us to Germany. After 2 weeks, during which I was still unconscious, my health began to improve, and I remember regaining consciousness just as I was being unloaded from the military train at Dresden. Before this battle, which almost made me say goodbye to my life, we had been told of a new Russian tank, the Joseph Stalin, which weighed 46 tons and fired 122 mm rockets. Thanks to its thick sloping armor, our 75 mm shells simply bounced off its hide unless we fired from the side and at very close range. When I was shooting at the T-34 in that valley, I didn't know that several of these monsters were waiting 2 kilometers away at the edge of the forest. No sooner had I pulled the trigger than the Russian behemoths started firing. The Russians hit our self-propelled vehicle with the first shot. The shell hit our machine between the barrel and the gun mask. It tore out the cannon where it hit and incredibly entered the fighting compartment where it exploded. Apparently my tank abandonment training was not in vain, because I was unconsciously able to crawl out of the tank and hide behind it. Since our assault gun was completely destroyed and our crew miraculously survived, our vehicle was dubbed the Miracle Tank of the Eastern Front. Our driver, who came out of this mess relatively unscathed, could not speak for 5 days. He was completely immersed in his own world of thoughts, I was told. Suddenly he jumped out of it and was assigned to drive another tank. On his first day back at the front, He was driving his tank over a wooden bridge when the bridge beneath him failed. Fortunately for the rest of the crew, they were sitting outside, but the driver was in his compartment at the front of the tank. When the tank fell under the bridge, it flipped over and fell into the water. The only casualty was my driver, who drowned because he couldn't get out of the sunken vehicle. For being wounded several times, I was awarded the Silver Woundedness Patch. This was awarded to every soldier who was wounded more than 3 times. In addition, I was awarded the Tank Attack Medal because I took part in 3 successful tank battles. This award was also given for participating in a tank operation against anti-tank artillery. The third and most prestigious of my awards was the Iron Cross Second Class. This medal was given for bravery beyond the call of duty and was a great honor if the recipient was below the rank of non-commissioned officer. I received all the awards for destroying 6 Russian tanks, 2 of them individually, and the remaining 4 in a single tank battle. I hit 4 Russian tanks in a battle when about 20 Russian tanks tried to break through our defense line near Narva. Somehow I managed to hit all 4 within a few minutes, at which time one of our tanks destroyed 2 more and our anti-tank battery successfully destroyed 4 more Russian tanks. Having lost 10 tanks out of 20, the Russians retreated into the woods. There were other incidents that led to my earning the fame of being a brave and dedicated soldier to my comrades. In 1944 I was transferred to the Western Front, and during the Ardennes Offensive we were stationed in a house opposite the launching sites of the FAU-1. The Fausts were also notorious for the fact that when they were first launched, they did not always fly straight to their targets. Instead, they often turned around in flight and exploded near the launch pad. FAU that were fired toward the Ardennes front usually flew over the house we were in, and since they flew only 10 meters above the house, it was very unpleasant. I will never forget that terrible roar. It sounded as if 10 Russian tanks were flying over us. On April 30th, the day Hitler committed suicide in his bunker, we heard on the radio and read in the newspaper that the Fuhrer had died a hero's death at the front in Berlin. Since the Americans were already in the outskirts of Munich, our lieutenant decided it was time for us to leave. We got on a trolley bus and drove to the southeastern suburbs of Munich, where the lieutenant left us for a while and returned in a rather natty Mercedes. From Munich we drove northeast to Passau on the Bavarian-Austrian border, and then east to Linz. At Linz we heard on the radio that Russian troops were approaching the city from the north. We turned back and drove to Salzburg. To the last I still hoped that Germany could win the war. I think our belief in victory all these years was based on our youthful ignorance, and on a firm belief in what Hitler did and said. Among other things, before the war he was a successful leader of our people. He did all these amazing things, he never lied to us, and why would he do that now? We just couldn't accept that after all the effort the war could be lost. On May 6th, while we were in the Tyrol, a German infantry officer wearing a white helmet and on a motorcycle with a white flag attached to the motorcycle rode up to us and informed us that we should immediately clear the road and hide behind one of the hay barns in a field. Soon we saw a convoy approaching consisting of American jeeps, German motorcycles with officers wearing white helmets and carrying white flags, and several 3-ton American Army trucks with machine guns and white flags attached on top. To me it was a sign of the end of the war. I don't remember where we spent that night, but the next morning we drove in our car farther west. We met some representatives of the American military police who stopped us and told us that we were now prisoners of the American Army and that the war was over. A ceasefire had been signed. We were ordered to follow one of them, and he led us to a wooded area and showed us where to stay. Somewhat surprisingly, we were not ordered to surrender our weapons. When we arrived where the military policeman ordered us to go, we found a large gathering of German tanks and soldiers, many of whom wore the distinctive Gross Deutschland patch on their cuffs. As luck would have it, here we were, along with the remnants of our great Germany, in close proximity to the American 45th Infantry Division. I can't understand why the Americans treated us with such cordiality and reverence. I have always believed that when a soldier surrenders to the enemy, the first thing he does is surrender his weapons to those who took him prisoner. However, this was not the case in our case, so I could only make assumptions as to why they did so. Earlier, when we were still traveling on the road from Vins, we met some German infantrymen carrying their weapons and heading east. We stopped to ask where they were going, because the Russians were advancing. And if these infantrymen were looking for their regiment, they should come with us. No, they replied. We're going east to fight the Russians, because the Americans are going to help us. Our lieutenant thought that was ridiculous, because it doesn't happen that way, that the enemy will change abruptly and after fighting you, will help you fight their own allies. But when I thought back to that episode, it suddenly dawned on me that maybe that was the reason we were left with guns. Maybe the Americans were just stalling because they thought we might be sent east to fight the Russians. But whatever their motives, 2 days later, on May 9th, we were told that the Russians and Germans had signed an agreement to end hostilities and that the war in Germany was finally over. We were ordered to fall in line and surrender our weapons to the Americans. At the same time, our battalion commander, a major, was told that we could keep 6 pistols for each company, to be carried by the officers. After a short time we were transferred to a village called Hof, also in Austria. We were instructed to remain in the village and not to leave it, and our major had to give his word of honor that he would do everything possible to prevent his soldiers from escaping. Moreover, he was told that we were to live as if there had been no war and we were still in the German army, that is, discipline was to be the same as before. Speaking of the Russians, although I never considered them subhuman, their behavior on the Eastern Front made me and my friends consider them two cruel people. When the war was still in full swing, and we had recaptured some village from the Russians, I happened to find the body of a good friend of mine near a field hospital. He was mortally wounded, but apparently the enemy had hit him over the head with a rifle but many, many times. Another time, during a battle, when we had to fight hand to hand, my comrade was bayoneted not once, but 20 times. And one more incident comes to my mind as a proof of their cruelty. During one of their attacks I was looking through the optical viewfinder of my tank with 40x magnification when I noticed a wounded German soldier a few hundred meters away who was trying to crawl back behind the front line. Suddenly the Russian soldier jumped out from behind the tree he was hiding behind and hit the German several times, killing him rather than taking him prisoner. Thinking back on such incidents, I was not surprised that any German soldier would hate even the thought of being wounded or captured by the Russians, because their chances of survival in that case were practically zero. We thought our state of war with the Americans was a tragically unfortunate situation, but now that the war was over, we were convinced that things would gradually get better. The day of our release from American captivity and from the German army had arrived. It turned out that I was not asked anything at the Liberation Center, and when it was all over, I wondered if they had read all the answers or just checked which units we belonged to. The 5 of us left the camp and after a while one by one went our separate ways. Finally I was left alone and went through Poing, Munich, Dachau and came home.